So what could be better than buying a derelict German-made dual turntable for $40? Well, how about buying two identical German-made dual turntables for $40? Yes, I have duals, so let's see what we have. So I've labeled the turntable A and B to keep them straight, so let's take a look at A. I've already tested both of them, and the motors actually do turn and the belts are intact. So my first turntable was a dual, actually a CS 530. This is a CS 505 Series 1. And to be honest, I never really liked it very much. It did have a low mass tone arm like this one, although with a standard cartridge mount. But it was cheap and plasticky. And when I picked this one up, or both of them up that is, I could immediately tell that this was not a higher end model. Or is it? So it turns out that this is really in two parts. So the plinth part here, this is made of cheap plastic, but some variations of this model had wooden plinths. Actually looked quite nice. But the part of it that makes it do anything is actually made of metal. As you can see, suspended on springs. There's actually no rubber feet under here at all. So let's see if we can get this apart. So before I started working on the turntable, I had some questions about a couple things and did some poking around on the internet and found that other videos have already been made about these turntables, and probably much better than the video I'm making right now. And the best one, or actually two videos, was made by the Turntable Guy channel. So this is actually a 505 Series 2. It has the more standard type of head shell that's removable and takes a cartridge mounted to it directly, and this particular example that he has the nicer wooden plinth. So it was nice to see what that looks like. But he really goes through all of the procedures that you'd need to know and carefully shows how to do them, and I really saw no reason to replicate what he was doing. You should just watch this video, which I'll link in the description, and I'll try in this video to give some value added things that I learned about this turntable in going through those procedures. So first let's take the platter off. These platter mounts are actually in fairly decent condition, all things considered. So then there's a cam here in the middle. So you basically turn this counterclockwise, lift that out, and the platter lifts off. And it's actually got a nice little sub platter here, sort of like a project or a Riga, and the belt is intact. So once you know the trick, opening this turntable up is actually quite easy. So there are these two screws here, which are normally in a loosened position because that's what allows the base to move up and down on the springs. But each of them is attached to a washer on the bottom that's keeping it from pulling up. So to make the washer clear the sort of notch in the base, and I'll take this one, I'm going to tilt it toward me so it's tilting like this, and then I'm going to lift the back of the turntable like this and lift that part out. And this one I'm going to tilt to the outside so the washer is tilting in, and there we go. So since the procedures were explained so well in the Turntable Guy video, there's no point in me repeating them, but I will tell you what I did that was described in his video. So first of all, I did the full bearing service on both turntables. I did the full motor service on both turntables, which was not as difficult as it seemed. I did the motor actuator switch service on both turntables as well. So on one of the turntables that I got, the speed selector switch was broken and the pitch fader knob did not work at all. The other turntable, they did work to a certain extent. So fixing the switch was an easy fix. So it was actually missing this spring right here. It's basically just a bent piece of metal that moves as you move the knob. So that was kindly provided by the previous owner in the bag of parts. So I just put that back in and that fixed the switch. But on the other turntable that broken, the knob did not work at all because the belt was missing. So the other turntable did have its belt, this tooth belt here, but it was very hard and brittle and really not working very well. So I used some rubber rejuvenator on it, which made it a little bit more pliable, but still too stretched to be useful. So these belts are commercially available, but they're quite expensive. So the Turntable Guy video recommended using belts from a tape deck mechanism. So I ordered a selection of these. So these are 3mm belts, 3 millimeters across, and stretching them out, they're about 45 millimeters in that direction like that. So I used 2 of those belts, one on top of the other, precisely on top of the other, to replace the missing belt and also the worn belt on the other turntable. And that seems to work pretty well. It's not perfect, but good enough. So the way the speed control actually works in this turntable is very interesting. So most turntables that have adjustable speed have a DC motor, certainly direct drive ones do, and ones I've worked on that have an AC motor don't actually have adjustable speed. But this has both an AC motor and adjustable speed, but you're not adjusting the speed of the motor, you're actually adjusting the size of the pulley. So instead of being an electronic or electric speed control, it's purely mechanical. So what happens is these leaves here expand as this piece is pulled down, and that makes the pulley bigger and changes the pitch, right? So that is controlled by this mechanism right here. So this lower gear is turned by the belt, and there's sort of a ramp between this one and this one that adjusts the distance between those and then basically presses this down like this. But after taking the whole thing apart, this nut in its position is crucial as well for precise speed. So I'll show you what I did. It's a little bit different than what the Turntable Guy did. So before setting the position of the nut, he recommended that the pointer of the lower gear be pointing straight at this brown part right here. So that's sort of like centering the potentiometers on a turntable with adjustable speed control that's electronic, so that when it's all set up, you have the greatest range of motion left and right, up and down for your speed control. So I've done that, and then he showed how to test the speed using a strobe disc, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So this turntable has an adjustable speed control, and it has the dots on the plier that you would use if you were using a strobe to set the speed, but there's no strobe, so you have to bring your own. So instead of doing that, I'm going to be using an app. So this app is called RPM. So this is the paid version of it, so it's unlimited use. And what's good about this one is that it will run continuously. It's not something that runs a cycle and then gives you a result. It will run as long as you want it to and help you to adjust the speed continuously. We're going to start the turntable up. So this takes a while to get up to speed. Okay, so we're at 33.53. So that's a little bit fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the turntable. Okay. And then if you move this hole over the mechanism, you can access this. Okay, so it was running a little bit fast. I'm going to take a 6mm wrench. I'm going to turn this nut slightly counterclockwise. So to speed it up, you're going to turn it clockwise. To slow it down, you're going to turn it counterclockwise. So just a little bit of a change. I'm going to run RPM again. Again, it takes a little while to get up to speed. And it's still a little fast, so we're going to keep trying this through trial and error until we get it right. So it took a few more tweaks with that nut, and now it's running just about perfectly. So again, with setting it this way, as the Turntable Guy described, the pitch fader knob is now in essentially the center. So if I need to make further adjustments in the future, I can do it with this. So there were proprietary cartridges available for these, but to mount a standard 1/2-inch mount cartridge, it mounts on this sort of sled. So assuming there was a cartridge in here, you flip the lever and it comes right out. So this tone arm is part of Dual's ultra low mass or ULM series. So they're designed to use with cartridges that are both light in weight and track lightly. So look at the two cartridges that I've selected for these two turntables. So the first one is an Ortofon Omega. This is very similar to the cartridge that was on my first dual turntable from the Ortofon OM series. I'm not sure why this is so inexpensive. It's only $40 brand new. It has an elliptical stylus and it really sounds great. So the second cartridge I'm going to be using is this Shure TM1E, a vintage cartridge with actually an original stylus on it. It is an elliptical. This is also relatively low mass and it tracks at a very light 1.25 grams. So I've mounted each cartridge in a sled, and you see that you have to use relatively low profile flat head screws here because this is going to actually go underneath the tone arm and needs to be able to clear these. So let's take a look at how this will get aligned. I downloaded the manual for the next model in the series, the CS505 Series 2. On the last page of the manual is an alignment gauge, but there's a few problems with this, at least if you want it to be accurate. So first of all is, what shape were these pages originally and how big were they? So in Europe they use different size paper than we do, and we don't know how this was scanned. So you need to make sure that when it's printed out at the right size. So there's some help here, particularly the number 221 millimeters. So that seems to be the distance from the tip of the stylus to the pivot of the tone arm. So experimenting with this, I was able to print it out at 58%, and which is approximately 221 millimeters. So here's the alignment gauge I printed out, and to be honest, it's not terribly useful. So this part here goes at the pivot point of the tone arm, about there, but now it's on top of the tone arm, so what am I supposed to do with that? You can sort of put it under the tone arm, and this is somewhat better, but still not a really precise measurement, but I think I have a better idea. So if the distance from the center of the pivot of the tone arm to the point of the stylus is supposed to be 221 millimeters, we can just measure that out with a proper ruler. So it looks like 221 is just about even with the front of the sled that's mounted in the head shell. So if we align the tip of the stylus with the front of the sled, we should be in pretty good shape. Okay, so I've got it mounted, and that doesn't look too bad right about there. So that's a starting point for our alignment. So to check the alignment, we're going to use this alignment protractor. So I'm going to bring the tone arm over and put the stylus down exactly on the target. So what I suggest that you do is that you, when you mount the cartridge in the sled, don't tighten the hardware down all the way. Make it a little bit snug so you can still wiggle the cartridge around, because you can't access the hardware when it's in the head shell like this. You can still wiggle it around, but it'll still stay in place, and you can take it out and tighten it up all the way. So what you're looking for is that when the stylus is on that dot, first of all, that the cantilever is going straight back along that center line, and that looks pretty good. Now, this particular cartridge is harder to align than the Shure is. The Shure is very rectangular, but you can see that this is tapered. So it'd be nice if it just had straight sides, but it doesn't. You want to make sure that it, again, moves along those parallel lines and is parallel to them. So I'm going to move it to the next target. That looks pretty good too. So that 221 millimeter measurement was a very good starting point to get this cartridge in the right spot. And you probably have to wiggle it a little bit left and right to get it exactly parallel, but this looks pretty good here right now. So I'm going to take this off and then tighten up the hardware. So this sled with the cartridge on is remarkably easy to remove from the head shell when you want to make these adjustments. But because it's remarkably easy to do that when you want to, it's also remarkably easy to do when you don't want to. So, for example, when you're moving the cartridge back, oops, there we go. Well, didn't show it, but I've already done this at least 4 times. So you don't want this to end up on the concrete floor in your basement. So there's a solution to this. Although they didn't mention it, in one video I watched about this turntable, there was a zip tie that had been wrapped around the head shell like this, and I assumed that it was broken or something, but now I realize why it was there. It's for safety. So when everything is adjusted nice on both turntables, I'm going to put a zip tie around here, and there's plenty of space to do that, and fix that down so no more accidents. So even with the bouncy action of the spring suspended mechanism, the shock absorption of this turntable leaves much to be desired. There's really no foot on it at all. On the bottom, just the plastic. So I'm going to give it some help with these sorbethane domes. These are 1.2 inch semicircular domes. I've cleaned this with alcohol and they're peel and stick. I'm just going to stick them on. So I've actually already tried this on the other turntable with great results, but I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment. So the ones on the other turntable are a slightly softer dome, and these are slightly harder. So I'm going to try both and see if there's a difference between them in terms of their shock absorption. So the softer domes I used were these from Soundrise. So these are 20 durometer in the rating of softness. And the harder ones I used were these from Sound Addicted. These are 35 durometer, and the specs say that these are good for supporting an object up to 24 pounds. So in testing both of them, I think I would have to say that the softer ones worked better for this turntable. So it wasn't a completely apples to apples comparison. So this turntable was the one that had the heavier tracking cartridge on it. So a heavier tracking cartridge often is better at resisting vibration than a lighter tracking one. But I think for the weight of this turntable, these are just fine. And these might be a little bit hard. They're still very effective though, and certainly a huge improvement over that plain plastic base that it came with. So this turntable is a semi-automatic, meaning it's manual start with an automatic stop, but in a way different than just about any other turntable that I've used. So most semi-automatic turntables, when you lift the arm and move it inward, it will turn on the motor, and this will do that as well. But if you notice, when I move it in, the tone arm's already or automatically in the up position, not the down position. So it forces you to use the cueing lever, which is the best way to put this down on the record. So very, very clever. So I'll put it down, and of course it plays, right? And to show how the automatic stop works, we lower it. So the arm will lift and the motor shuts off. So in summary, it was a real pleasure to work on 2 of the same turntable at the same time. So the Dual CS505 Series 1 is a brilliantly engineered, precisely made turntable. The automatic mechanism is elegantly simple. The speed control is probably more complicated than it needs to be, but nevertheless, these turntables are 40 years old and they now work perfectly. Can't ask for a whole lot more than that. Thanks for watching.